you guys a story about my first day ever doing customer service. Many of us have called customer service before. I mean, all of us have at some point called tech support. Am I right, John? Excellent. But it was my first day ever. And it was 8 a.m. on a Saturday. All of the support staff that had been around me the day before was gone. I pick up the phone, and the very first call that came through was Dr. God, which means he has an MD, and therefore he was better than me. And after a little bit of troubleshooting, I established that the good doctor had broken his laptop. The screen was shattered, spider webs everywhere. His computer had not come with spiders. It had gotten that way through his own actions. And that's a $1,200 repair because it is not covered by his warranty. And I broke the news to him as gently as I could, and he proceeded to spend the next 15 minutes yelling at me and telling me how terrible I was. And I, the good little Apple employee, shut him down. And I said, you can speak with my supervisor if you want, but they're going to tell you the exact same thing. Well, he eventually bought the company line and got off my phone. And when he hung up, I removed my headset and cried. And it was that kind of cry you can only have when you're 21. I'm never gonna have to move back in with my mom. And eventually, when the sobbing subsided, I put my headset back on and went back to it. 10 years later, I realized that although I did a good job supporting the product, I did a bad job supporting him because he was angry, and part of my job as a customer service representative was to diffuse that anger. And so what I want to tell you about today, what I want to teach you about is anger, both the roots of it, how your brain processes it, and how you can deal with it. In a way, it's kind of a superpower. So let's start off with some goals. Tim, can I get you to read the first one, and we'll continue around for everyone to read an objective.
Okay. Identify the 4 relative segments of this model.
Understand each segment's psychological function.
Determine an upset person's state of mind.
Understand the cortex cutoff concept.
Learn to stimulate a targeted section of the psyche. And finally, role play bringing an out-of-control person to under control. So, do I have any people with a psychology background in here? Anyone who's studied psychology in school or enjoyed psychology as a entity?
I was born with a gift. Understand.
Brilliant. When I've given this presentation to other people in the psychological realm, they've told me that it's pretty close. But for the time being, I want to show you a model of the brain. There it is. You'll notice that it is severely simplified, but there's no medulla oblongata, there's no gray matter, the spinal cord is kind of just a red lump. But this is a very simplified but general impression of the brain. And your brain is made up into 4 parts. First off, the modern brain. Next, mammalian, then reptilian, and finally, primitive. We're going to go into each of these individual parts as we continue, but the important thing to take away from this slide is that you can go to your neighbor, but you can't walk down the block, which means each part of the brain can communicate with the part that's next to it, but you can't skip a layer. For example, primitive and reptilian, best buds, but reptilian can't talk to modern. So let's talk about that modern brain. What is the modern brain? The modern brain is the part of your brain that is known as the frontal lobes. This is the part of the brain that was most recently evolved and is the part that cognitively separates us from any other mammal. So your dog, your cat, your favorite platypus, none of them have this piece of the brain. And it is the part that truly makes us human, the part that understands art and etiquette and religion and beauty and joy. It is the part that makes you you. The things you love, the things you're passionate about, all exist in this modern brain. It is also the very first part of your brain that shuts down whenever you're emotional, whenever you're upset, whenever you're feeling just kind of all out there. Next up, mammalian brain. This is also known as the neocortex, and you can guess at what point in our evolution it evolved. It evolved with mammals. And it can understand basic logic, basic reason, basic understanding, and it processes cause and effect before the modern brain can understand the why. For example, if I drop this, then I know that what comes up must come down, and that is part of the mammalian brain. As a human, I can say not only what comes up must come down, but it's going to come down at a rate of 9.8 meters per square. It is going to result in cards all over the place. I understand that the force unleashed this little latch thing, and that is the logical consequence. If I were more mathy in general, or perhaps I should just delegate that to Craig, but if I were more mathy in general, I could probably calculate the amount of spread that the individual cards are going to have, etc. Modern brain versus mammalian. For another example, let's take our friend the beaver. To begin with, I grew up in Texas. There are no beavers in Texas. The very first time that I was in the woods and saw evidence of a beaver, I was shocked. I was like, they really do that. And then the beaver came out of its hiding space, and my thought was, oh my gosh, you look exactly like what you're supposed to. The cartoons have prepared me for this moment. Much like humans, beavers build dams. And we build dams for the same general reason, because we want to stop the river, because we want the fish to congregate in that area. We want to keep the water from going downstream so we can build houses, etc. We build dams for the same basic reason. But a beaver doesn't care about beauty. A beaver just wants a functional dam, so it just puts sticks wherever it wants to. As humans, we could do that too, but because we appreciate art and glory and beauty, we don't have to build a beaver dam. We instead build dams that people want to see. We build dams that people go to. This is the Hoover Dam outside of Las Vegas. And everyone I've spoken to who's been there has called it glorious. And even this image, just thinking about the scale, strikes me as, the only appropriate word is grandeur. And that's because we as humans can cognitively process that sort of beauty. Moving on to the reptilian brain. Again, you can guess at what point we evolved the reptilian brain. It was with reptiles. So reptiles have this part of the brain. And this is the limbic system. Don't worry, limbic system will not be on the test. It processes and understands emotion by comparing what it currently sees in front of it to what has happened in the past. It's also extremely volatile. I remember once I was in a car accident and I went from being able to talk just fine with a police officer and have a conversation and kind of laugh it off to being completely and utterly incoherently sobbing upset like my mom's gonna kill me. And that's because the reptilian brain is all over the place. It is also directly connected to the primitive brain. And that means that your emotions can affect how you feel. Have you ever been so hungry you got mad? Have you ever been so nervous your palms sweat? Your emotions connect directly into the part of your brain that affects your physicality. So let's move on to that part of the brain and talk about the primitive brain. This is also known as the brainstem. And the brainstem is dedicated to keeping you alive. Is the first part of the brain that reacts to a given situation. So it controls your fight or flight responses, and these reactions develop by age 4. This is the part where I always encourage you to be nice to children. They're not just little adults. If a child continually sees this as a threatening action versus an affectionate action, that will stay with them their entire lives because those reactions develop so early. It is also the only part of the brain that can shut down everything else. It's the kill switch. And if you think about it, it makes sense. If you're walking along the road one day and you see a Volvo jump the curb and aim at you, then you don't want your modern brain functioning and saying, oh, that's a 1998 Volvo. That was an excellent year for Volvos. No, you want your primitive brain to say, nope, I'm out of here, and run away, because otherwise you will die. Let's think about primitive brain reactions in a little bit more detail. Let's say that it's a nice summer day. You decide to go down to the park that's down the street from your home. You're sitting, you're eating lunch, maybe you're having a picnic. You feel something brush against your leg, and you see that guy. Is anyone else a cat person? More dog people in this room? Excellent. If you prefer dogs, imagine a little puppy. Dog or cat, you're probably going to reach down. You're going to pet it. You're going to say, what are you doing here? And get that sing-song voice. But the vast majority of us are going to be completely okay that there is a dog or cat interrupting our lunch. On the other hand, let's say that it's the same lunch, the same park, the same brushing, and instead of a dog or a cat, you see that guy. The vast majority of us, insect and arachnid experts aside, if we saw that coming at us, we would throw our picnic up in the air, create a stream of expletives, and run. And that's because at some point in our upbringing, we have associated that with death, that with pain, and that with injury. And therefore, our primitive brain says, avoid it at all costs. So let's talk about the cortex cutoff and how this relates to anger. And we will save that piece for next time. For right now, I will welcome our Toastmaster back up.
Hey.
Thank you, Tim.